So now we are moving on. We had our young, brilliant experts speaking their truth to power. Now power is here to respond. So this is the second panel, and we're going to have Leslie Archambault as our moderator. And Leslie is the Managing Director for Humanitarian Policy at Save the Children. And Save the Children is one of our co-sponsors today and has done a tremendous amount of work making this happen. And I'd also like to give them a special shout out for arranging the young girls from Cox's Bazar who had to be escorted in their refugee camp at night to the Save the Children office to join us. So that was a huge effort on the part of the Save the Children team in Cox's Bazar. And those girls were just incredible, right? I mean, staying up late and speaking to all of you from afar, I found that really incredibly moving. So over to Leslie and this team of policymakers. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I feel like I'm always a little awkward with a microphone, so I'll just jump right in and try not to be awkward. But really it's so wonderful to see you all today. The first panel was fantastic. I can't wait to rewatch it. Just some really wonderful insights. And we're just so happy to have our guests here today. I don't know if you all know this, but it is really difficult to get time on some of these people's schedules. They are running from meeting to meeting and decision-making space to decision-making space. And it also happens to be UNGA Week. The opening of the UN General Assembly is this week, and which made it even more difficult to get time on some schedules. So we really do appreciate you and your time. So as Gillian said, my name is Leslie Archambault. I'm from Save the Children. I've got a handy script so I don't go off and ramble too much because I am a bit of a talker, so I will do my very best. I wanted to just sort of set the stage a little bit for what this discussion is going to be about before I introduce our panelists and start asking them questions to hear from them. I think we heard from our young people earlier today. We have sort of a more specific sense of their experiences and what they go through. Overall, and as Gillian said a little bit this morning, but just as a reminder, the Children on the Move issue is not going away. We're seeing more and more children on the move every year. In June, UNICEF came up with a pretty good stat that 43.3 million children have been displaced either internally or across international borders. And that was June. That number has already gone up. It goes up every day. And so unless we're sort of looking at the policy solutions to try to address this, how are we ever going to get on top of it, right? We have to look at both root causes, we have to look at the immediate needs, and then we have to look at the long-term, more durable solutions for this. Each of those on the panel today is coming in with their own sort of unique perspective and their own unique role in this broader policy and practice system. And so we're really excited to learn from them and to hear some of their insights on their work, particularly as relates to children on the move. So let me introduce them all. And unfortunately, I will say we were supposed to have one more panelist. You've probably noticed we are one short. Unfortunately, she is not feeling well. And with COVID risks being what they are again, it is definitely best that she stay home. And so we let her do that. But we'll make sure we catch up with her another day. So first, let me just introduce who's with us here today. Sitting right next to me here is Kelly Lower. Kelly serves as Senior Protection Officer for the State Department's Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration. She's in the Office of Policy, Resource, and Planning. She leads on the Bureau's efforts on a range of protection issues, including child protection, alternatives to detention, protection in mixed migration, access to asylum, and others. So a huge portfolio, basically everything, so thrilled you're here. Before working with PRM, she was at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the State Department and also at the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. So a lot of fantastic experience you bring to this conversation, so thank you and welcome. Next to Kelly, I'd like to introduce Leah Chavla. Leah is the Senior Level Representation Advisor on the Child Services Team for the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the Department of Health and Human Services. Your title is 3 lines on my paper, so it's a mouthful, and we're looking forward to hearing you explain what it all means. Leah is an international human rights lawyer who advocates for the rights of women, children, and families. She joined the Office of Refugee Resettlement 2 years ago next month, and has been there ever since, so really thrilled for that. She works as a child advocate and on child advocate and post-release services, as well as case management initiatives, family reunification efforts. And prior to joining ORR, Leah worked at the Women's Refugee Commission, a fantastic organization, and also served as an attorney at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And I would love to corner you and ask you about that later as well, although that's beyond the scope of this particular conversation. And last but not least, not a US government policymaker, but just as critical to this conversation, I'd like to introduce John Hoyseiter, and I'm sure I said his name wrong, but he has told me it's okay because I'm an American and we always say it wrong. John is UNHCR's deputy representative to the US and the Caribbean. He has 25 years of experience working within UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. He's worked in various refugee and displacement operations in the field, including the Caucasus and in Bangladesh, so supporting girls like those we heard this morning in Cox's Bazar. And he has also worked on global refugee policy with UNHCR headquarters in Geneva, so a really critical role there. Currently, he's the deputy representative for UNHCR's multi-country office here in DC, and we're so thrilled that you are here. So enough intros and enough of me. Would love to start hearing from all of you. And John, the first question is for you, if that's okay. So certainly in your work, you are very familiar with the impacts that US policy and practice is having on children on the move. You see it firsthand all the time. So we're keen to hear your thoughts on how current US policies are, or perhaps are not always, supporting children on the move, what the impact of these policies are on these children, and a bit about UNHCR's response.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Leslie. And let me first just thank you all for inviting us to the panel today. Great to hear about the first panel you had, and hope to have a chance to look at that later. It's in fact my second panel at Georgetown in a week. So there must be something in the environment here that brings attention to the issues we're talking about. So really appreciate being here and look forward to the conversation with you today. Yes, you started with a question on the US, but let me just at least say a couple of sentences from a global perspective. And you gave a couple of numbers up front. From UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, most of you will be familiar. It's a bit of a mouthful as well, so we sometimes say the UN Refugee Agency when we speak to journalists, etc. The perspective we have on this globally is, of course, that more than 40% of the world's forcibly displaced are children. So that means for us that the response to children is at the heart of our mandate as an organization. It is a key priority for us to address the needs of children in displacement. And as we pursue that, we recognize that children are exposed to different risks than adults, and children have vulnerabilities that need to be taken into account from the outset. So for us, the issue of response to children on the move is a global effort. It is something that we work on in all operations around the world, and so also in the United States and in this region. There's a lot to be said about this. I only have a few minutes for this first question, so let me try and put together a few points for you. First of all, right off the bat, let me say that the United States is in a unique situation in that it is the largest and most sophisticated response to unaccompanied children that we see in the world today. I think it's an important part of the starting point for this discussion. I think you all know, with the growth of movements over the last decade, the United States, I think in 22, but colleagues will correct me, have dealt with more than 120,000 unaccompanied children arriving in this country. That is a scale that we're not seeing anywhere else in the world at the moment. fundamentally, from UNHCR, we are looking at the US response with a lot of optimism, with a lot of acknowledgement and gratitude that the US is able to set up a response, and I'll mention a few key aspects of that positive response, that does not receive children only through the lens of immigration enforcement, but through a services and support lens, and I think we'll hear more about that in this panel. Other positive elements is that the US has as a priority to keep families united. We appreciate that the government looks at how to avoid, as far as possible, custody of children. We recognize all of the efforts in this country to improve legal representation for children. We also see, of course, all of the efforts made to deal with children's needs after the initial arrival, after the initial processing, and into the inclusion and integration services that are available. So all in all, a lot to appreciate in the US response as it is. Another positive, the US is for UNHCR probably our biggest global, not probably, it is our biggest global partner in protecting and finding solutions for refugees around the world. So I know it's not the main topic of discussion today, but I think it is also part of the setting. We work with refugee response, including for children all over the world. It would not have been possible to do that the way it's done without the support from the United States in so many different ways. However, there's always a however, and there's always ways to improve. And there are a number of things that in the current US response that we see problems with, and that we are trying to seek entry points to improve together with the US government. And you will know some of these. One of them, maybe the most evident one for us, relates to the US southern border in its current context. The normative and operational response framework that is governing the activities at the US southern border. And without going into too much detail, what we've seen in recent years are policies that we have observed tend to split families as opposed to hold them together, meaning that families also choose to separate in order to allow a child maybe to have a better chance to enter the United States and to be allowed to stay once they arrive. So this link between policy and impact on people on the move is an important concern that we are looking at, and one that we'd like to see be addressed better than it is today. Another more specific point is maybe what is a family in the eyes of the US response at the border? A family, yes, it's a nuclear family, but what about a child traveling with a grandmother or a stepfather? We are seeing policies that and practices on the ground that do not allow that type of family unity to be maintained, with the detriment in many situations to what children are experiencing. And let me also mention, maybe specifically, because I'm talking at the border, the situations of Mexicans who are crossing the border. It is one of the largest groups of people entering the United States, including in terms of the unaccompanied children. And we are seeing a lot of Mexican children going through a very fast-track return back to Mexico, which raises questions about whether or not all protection elements are taken care of. So as you hear from what I'm saying, many of the elements here are linked to the broader policy framework of response. How do they impact on children in different situations? And I spoke a lot about unaccompanied children so far, but this is also for children traveling with their families. So for instance, at the moment, again, without going into a lot of detail, restrictions at the border will lead some to go into expedited removal procedures. Now, expedited removal procedures exist in many countries of the world, and it is, of course, up to the United States how it wants to implement its obligations. But we are seeing families going into expedited procedures in facilities, in arrangements that don't necessarily have ideal arrangements for children. So again, a broader policy framework that impacts on how do children experience their opportunity. Maybe the flip side of that is also we're seeing at the moment a US government, US administration, very eager to engage with people on the move also outside of the United States, further away, closer to the origin of where people have left from. That's an approach that we very much support from UNHCR. We need to find ways to get closer to the point of departure that people are trying to move from. We need to find protection and solutions at an earlier stage before people have had to expose themselves to smuggling, trafficking, very dangerous journeys en route. We have to do both of these. There has to be the asylum access, but there also has to be this effort to reach people earlier. And again, as we devise those programs, we need to look at what's the children's place in that. What is it that makes resettlement programs, but also other legal pathways, reach the children who need it most and be implemented in a way that is positive for children. I'll end with a couple of words on UNHCR's role. That will differ in different operations, in different situations around the world, but there are a few basics that are also very relevant to the United States. One is the monitoring, the awareness of what is actually happening to children. We have in the United States not big operational responses. That's not our value added here, but we do have staff who are able to visit locations, to assess situation, including at the US southern border. And we are using that information as we go into dialogue with US authorities, dialogue with civil society, to see how can we help improve the collective response. And that includes in the way that the US is organizing its response, the way that the US is aiming to reform its systems. So we are looking for entry points there. Can we bring our knowledge both from our monitoring, but also from our knowledge from systems around the world, our knowledge about what has been tried elsewhere? How do we bring that into discussions with the US government? And we have examples of that we can come back to. Maybe finally, we have other tools in our toolbox. Our starting point is how can we work with states, not against them? How can we work with states to improve their response? How do we work with civil society to facilitate their engagement, even private sector? How do we work with all actors? That's our starting point. But there are other ways, of course, to engage in advocacy for children. And certainly when we have tried everything we can to work with all actors, we also do actions, for instance, in the legal sphere when it comes to litigation. We don't litigate on behalf of refugees. What we do is we share with courts our assessment of an issue that's being raised in a court. So for cases that are pending, including in the US, UNHCR will share its expertise with the court, so-called amicus briefs, to say, here is the issue at stake, here is how we think it applies in a certain case. We're not a decision maker, but we try and facilitate good decisions in the legal sphere. And finally, we of course also are involved, like many of you in this room, on public information around these issues. So we have issued reports through the years. Going back a few years, we issued a report called Children on the Run, which had focus on the Central America and the route north. But we also have, in different ways, making available information to the public, to the media, so that this policy development work is happening as much as it can happen in societies that are well informed about the issues we're dealing with. I think I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you so much. That was really, I should have brought a notepad. I'm taking lots of notes in the margins. I really appreciate the zooming out and then the zooming back in, and really reflecting on the lots of different roles that the US government plays, both here in the US, but obviously, but also around the world. And I do think that that's an important perspective, that we can't just sort of narrow our focus. We really need to talk about children on the move globally, and that was really the whole point of this conversation here today, that we're talking about children as children who need protection wherever they are, and the US's role everywhere. So thank you very much. That was really useful. Okay, so next I would love to hand over to Leah. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the questions I asked just to make sure that I'm asking them exactly what I said I would, because I promised I would be faithful to that. So thank you, Leah, for being here. So your role, ORR, play such a critical part of the efforts to support children on the move who have entered the U.S., particularly unaccompanied and separated children, as John had noted. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your work, how ORR is currently addressing the needs of children on the move regardless of where they come from, and also a little bit more about the capacity and structures that you have in place to really focus on protection first and foremost for these children.
Well, thank you very much, Leslie, for inviting me to join, and thank you to everyone, echoing Jan, thank you very much for coming out today. Jan did a great job, I think, introducing some of the elements, and so before I respond and dive in on the questions I think that you asked, I wanted to briefly explain ORR's role a little bit, just kind of laying the foundation. I think a lot in the room, a lot of folks might be really familiar, and for others, this might be new information. So ORR has a very distinct role in the process for unaccompanied children. ORR provides for the temporary care and physical custody of unaccompanied children who are referred to ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, by other federal agencies. So ORR receives most of the referrals of unaccompanied children from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. However, ORR may also receive referrals from other federal agencies as well. ORR accepts referrals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't matter, holidays, we're operational all the time. Once children are referred to ORR, ORR is charged with placing unaccompanied children in the least restrictive setting that is in the best interest of the child. So ORR policy informs the placement decision of the child, and this is grounded in legal requirements as well as child welfare best practices. So often how we achieve the least restrictive setting in the best interest of the child is through discharge to a vetted sponsor whom ORR has determined to be capable of providing for the child's physical and mental well-being. We refer to this as the sponsor vetting or case management process at ORR. So Leslie, you asked, how does ORR address the needs of children on the move regardless of where they come from? I'd like to address a few points there. So our care provider facilities where the children are temporarily placed with us, they have a wealth, and also ORR staff have a wealth of child welfare expertise. ORR operates a continuum of care provider facilities, and so we're making these placement decisions based on the unique circumstances of the child, so not just age, but really looking into other factors, based also, of course, on the information that we have available at the time of referral. While ORR conducts its sponsor vetting process, all children in care are provided with certain services that Jan, I think, was mentioning. So some examples of these are mental and medical health care, classroom education, vocational training, socialization, recreation, and access to legal services. Some children may also be appointed an independent child advocate who conducts additional best interest advocacy on behalf of the child. Within 24 hours of arriving at an ORR facility, children are given the opportunity to speak with a parent, guardian, loved one over the phone, to give a sense of the dimension of the population, and Jan is absolutely correct. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but last year was over 120,000 referrals, and this year we're on target, for a similar figure. But just over the past year alone, children from at least 60 different countries were referred to ORR. So how do we meet that? The needs, in addition to encouraging our care providers to hire linguistically and culturally diverse staff, ORR has also engaged in other efforts. So we have really tried to ramp up language access overall as one such effort. We even deployed in-person interpreters, in particular for indigenous languages, to care provider facilities. We've also ramped up our translation of many documents that are available and are critical in our sponsor vetting process, among others, into beyond just English and Spanish. Following discharge to a sponsor, all children and sponsor receive safety and well-being calls. We do our very best to reach every single child who's discharged to a sponsor. The purpose of the call is to determine whether the child is still residing with the sponsor, is enrolled or attending school, is aware of their upcoming court dates, because every child has their own immigration proceedings, and also, most importantly, whether that child is safe. ORR is also increasing access to ORR-funded legal services, as well as really ramping up our post-release services, which are sort of wraparound community-based, access to community-based supports. In terms of types of capacity and structures that ORR has in place to ensure children are treated as children. I'm just going to touch on a few examples in addition to those that I've already shared, but I did want to stress again at the top that ORR, our Unaccompanied Children Program, which is sort of half of the ORR house, so to speak, we have a child welfare mission overall. So we're not involved in the initial encounter or apprehension of children, nor are we involved in their immigration proceedings. ORR works to make contact with a potential sponsor for an unaccompanied child as soon as possible, really starting from the time of referral. And we really try to do the outreach to the sponsor to begin the sponsor vetting process as soon as possible. And then another point something that I've really worked very closely on, ORR recognizes that the appointment of individual child advocates is a resource that many more children in our custody could benefit from. And so we've been working to try to enhance and increase access to that really important resource. And then finally, I will say, because I think gaps and areas for improvement was something that you may have also wanted us to address is, yeah, very important to mention. ORR's legal custodial responsibilities end when children are released from our care, and I think that that's something really important to mention here. ORR does not have any legal authority to remove a child from a home once we release them to a vetted sponsor. Once children are released to sponsors, ORR provides a range of services and supports, and we have hotlines that any children can call sponsors, family members, and those operate 24/7. And then lastly, as another sort of area for improvement is an ongoing work, really. ORR regularly tries to engage with stakeholders and really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to engage with you all. We work to continue to educate stakeholders and share more about unaccompanied children, how ORR works with unaccompanied children, and most importantly, the role the community plays once ORR's role is over and children are no longer in ORR custody. So thanks.
Great. No, thank you. That is so interesting. I didn't know most of that. I'm also thinking that if I was a child, that would be very, very confusing. So I'm really happy to hear about some of the other structures you have in place to hopefully ensure that the child understands what's going on. You mentioned child advocates, legal services, a diverse staff, which I think is really important, and love to hear that you're translating documents as well, and hopefully in ways that children can also understand, so that they can, the legalese can be and I am a lawyer, and that sounds very complicated, so thank you for all of that. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'd love to turn to Kelly next. So Kelly, we've heard from UNHCR, we've heard from ORR. There's just so many acronyms, but we'd love to hear about PRM, the State Department's Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration. We'd love to know a little bit more about PRM's mandate and sort of this role in all of this. John noted that the U.S. government is one of the largest partners. Feel like that was diplomatic speak for donor, but yes, a partner and a big funder. So certainly that's a big part of your work, and how PRM ensures that a child lens is happening through U.S. government funding would be really useful to know. And then just to add one more question, I've given her multiple questions to answer. I would also love to hear a little bit about PRM's role in sort of global policy on refugees and migrants. Certainly the U.S. government has a large political voice around the world as well, and PRM has a sort of a key place in that world. So over to you. Okay. Answer what you can. No pressure. We'll bug you with questions later too.
Yeah, so absolutely happy to. So just to echo my thanks for having us here. It's always great to be able to have these kinds of conversations with a variety of different stakeholders. So I am going to zoom us out just a little bit from the domestic context and speak a little bit more about the global space for children on the move. So PRM is the Humanitarian Bureau for the Department of State, and our mandate is to provide humanitarian assistance for life-saving protection and other assistance to people in need. And so that covers refugees, it covers conflict victims, internally displaced persons, stateless persons, and other vulnerable migrants. So a lot. And through our diplomacy and programming, PRM works across our interagency and the international community to find longer-term, durable solutions for forced displacement while meeting their immediate needs. That's our joint kind of mandate and focus. And so this assistance and solutions are really an essential and critical component when we want to address the record number of forcibly displaced children around the world today. So as Jan had said, as the single largest humanitarian donor, including to UNHCR, the United States is a powerful voice and a powerful champion for children on the move. And PRM has made significant investments in the global child protection architecture. And we're really proud to support local, international, and non-governmental partners to be able to do this important work and to address the unique needs of children during humanitarian crises. So for us, all children matter in all of their diversity, and it's critical that our programming proactively and meaningfully include all children and consider their unique needs based on their age, their gender, their disability or ability, their ethnicity, displacement status, and other factors that could affect their vulnerability. We also recognize that humanitarian emergencies disproportionately affect girl children and adolescents. We know that in forced displacement contexts, their risk for abuse, exploitation, neglect, violence, GBV, all increases dramatically so. And so for us, girl children and adolescents require tailored support to prevent, mitigate, and respond to these risks, which has been a long-standing global commitment for PRM through our Safe from the Start initiative. We're committed to prioritizing the most marginalized children across all of our programming, but also through our diplomatic and policy work as well. At the programmatic level, what does this look like? So this looks at funding child protection interventions, including quality case management, community-based protection structures, caregiver supports, and advocate that all of these interventions are a minimum service package that can be offered to children in all sorts of conflict and affected situations, emergencies, forced displacement, et cetera. We work very closely with our USAID colleagues and the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance to accomplish these goals. We also know that local communities, parents, and caregivers know how best to protect their children, and they must be key stakeholders in the planning and delivery of assistance and in the work to identify durable solutions. And as we've previously heard today, children and adolescents know themselves this work best. They know what risks they face. They often know ideas on how to mitigate those risks, and it's on us to be able to advocate for their inclusion and listen to their needs. Yet, all too often, we and the department and the international community, we don't hear directly from them. And so this is an area for PRM, an area of growth for us, and an area that we are looking really strategically at, including making sure that our implementing partners are including their voice from the very start of humanitarian assistance planning to make sure that any operations are really in line and directly addressing their needs. We're doing this, of course, through our programming, which is robust. PRM's budget was just over $5 billion last year for our humanitarian assistance, so it's significant. But it's also a key component of our engagement at the policy and global level. And this includes our preparations and engagement for the lead up and during the Global Refugee Forum. So our strategy for the Global Refugee Forum, which will be held in December and is a key moment for all of us in the international community to come together to discuss the situation of refugees worldwide, identify solutions, and this, of course, includes children. Our strategy for the forum is both focusing on promoting solutions and inclusion, while also advocating for innovative new partnerships, both of which, of course, also have huge implications and potential to improve the lives of children on the move. This could include opportunities to expand refugee inclusion into national education systems and social protection systems. It could also include durable solutions for refugees that could be based off of family reunification. So PRM, as we lead into the GRF, PRM is particularly pleased to co-lead the GRF's multi-stakeholder pledge on, this is a mouthful, economic inclusion and social protection, which aims to galvanize concrete commitments from a wide range of stakeholders to advance the self-reliance of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. It will advocate for inclusive law and policy to enhance economic inclusion, to address or access agricultural land, food security, local employment, quality of work, lifelong learning, and access to social protection systems. This, of course, by empowering caregivers to have access to safe and quality economic opportunities, it empowers their communities, it empowers the children that they're caring for. All of these interventions, even at that economic level, obviously have trickle-down effects, and we know that the best way to improve the child protection response is through their caregivers and their communities. And so by focusing on durable solutions and inclusion at every level, we know that the benefits will come down to children as well. So with that, I'm just saying we're keen to identify ways that we can make sure that child rights are part of all of those various interventions, and I'm sure that means working quite closely with many of the stakeholders here and in the room, and look forward to doing so. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes, PRM certainly has its work cut out for you, and you've got a massive mandate, and really appreciate you sort of zooming out and answering all of the many questions I threw at you. And I love that you mentioned the Global Refugee Forum, which is something many of us in this room are tracking and really do want to see this as a moment to drive progress for child refugees. I also just wanted to highlight one other thing that you said. You talked about sort of age, gender, and disability status and other factors of diversity. I think oftentimes we talk about children and young people like they are this homogenous group. Adults are not homogenous, and neither are children. They experience things differently. They face different barriers and obstacles. And we need to take all of that into account, and I'm really, really thrilled that you called it out. That is something that I've been talking about for anyone who knows me for a good 2 decades or so, thank you for mentioning it. Okay, wonderful. You started to touch on my next question for all of you, which is great, so you gave us a little bit of a preview. We heard from some children and young people earlier today. It was fantastic. I had a friend in the audience texting me who said we should listen to children more. I'm paraphrasing, and it's like, yes, we should. And so I'd love to ask all of you, sort of in your role, in your teams, and your various mandates, how do you consult with children? How do you hear from them on sort of the decisions around policies and programs and interventions? And if you don't do it, how can we all support you so that we can do this better and really make sure that we're tailoring things as children need them, as they experience them, as they prioritize them? I'd love to start with you, John, if that's okay. Can I throw to you first?
Yes, and no, thanks for including that question and for putting it up front as one of the starting points, because it's and also interesting that you frame it clearly as a challenge where we're not quite there yet, because I think that's a given in the humanitarian and community and international response that we haven't succeeded, I think, fully to engage children in what happens in the response and how they're affected by it. So maybe just a few reflections from my side on this, looking at it from UNHCR. And maybe just to unpack it a bit in a few dimensions. One is for us, of course, that engaging children in decisions that affect them is the practical and smart thing to do if we want to be effective. Because we need to have their participation and their inclusion to inform how can we be effective in designing solutions, how can we make sure that what we do has an impact on their reality. So that practical aspect is there. There's also an accountability issue for us. So we are accountable to the people we are supporting. We're receiving resources. We are the custodian of a global mandate that the UN has given UNHCR to support refugee children in this case. So we are accountable to deliver a result. And if we're going to be accountable to children, we need to communicate with children. We need to make sure that they are aware of their situation, they're aware of our role, and that we can fulfill our mandate in the way that is expected of us. And finally, the third aspect for us is the framing, of course, as children's response as one of rights. Children are also rights holders. They're not just a member of a family or a vulnerable individual. They have rights as individuals. And to define those rights clearly and to respect and implement them is, of course, a very important aspect of the participatory element. So There's a lot to be said about how we are or are unable to achieve this, but maybe a couple of, taking it to the US context again, a couple of things that we have been doing on this. And one is practical guidance on participatory approaches, as we speak about often in UNHCR. So how do you engage people on the move, in particular children? What are the experiences around the world on this? What's the expertise available to bring to bear to implement this in programming? And how do we share that? How do we make sure that actors have the same starting point and the same knowledge available? So that's one area where UNHCR sees that we have a value added because of our global role, because of the resources we have and the expertise we have within the organization on this. And we have also worked on this with US agencies, including those who are here with me in the panel, in terms of what could this mean, for instance, in a surge situation at the US southern border? What is the space for, in very large-scale operational responses, which have a lot of investment in them, in those, how do you communicate with children who might be confused about their situation, who might need a calm environment to be able to communicate effectively? So we have, in very practical ways, had dialogue with the US government on this, including ORR and others, and we appreciate that we are given that space. So it's something that we want to continue to develop. Another aspect maybe to flag from our perspective here is the concept of the best interest of the child. And that is something that, of course, is relevant everywhere, so also in the US. Having worked around the world on refugee issues, it's interesting to me to see how this country often does not have all concepts so well legislated. It isn't defined as it might be for instance, some European countries where there will be very elaborate legislation, even around specifically on the best interest of the child. While in the US, it is more based on pieces of legislation, pieces of policy, and also outcomes, of course, of judicial decisions that guide and can also be effective, of course, in guiding actions around best interest of the child. But again, for us, there's a link here. We cannot get to the best interest of the child if we don't communicate with the child, if we don't give children a space to articulate what is their wish for the outcome of a situation. So that's, a particularly important aspect for us. And, we wouldn't be the UN if we didn't have documents to guide people. And so we have something called a framework for the protection of children. It's quite old now. I think it's at least 10 years old. But it has one of the goals. This is also guidance for ourselves, by the way. It's one of the goals it has is goal number 2, which talks about children's participation and capacity are integral to their protection. And it offers a few pages with practical guidance of what does that mean? What are the elements of it? How does it mean in policy development? What does it mean in operational response? What does it mean in community engagement? What does it mean in mentoring for children, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a lot of guidance out there. That's my point, and we are one of the entities that are involved with that.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. I will say UNHCR also has some fantastic guidance on the best interests of the child. I was just sharing it with someone else the other day, and I love to hear you mention it. You don't know how often people are like, what does that mean? Why are we putting it in this policy document? And it's like, well, it is a foundational principle when we're talking about child rights. And so I think it's great that we keep bringing it up in these conversations, even if there isn't a law around it. We'll keep working on that on our end. But yeah, no, thank you very much. That was really helpful, and I really appreciate you sort of honing in on why exactly it is critical to talk to children, both because it is their right to be heard, but also for accountability and effective programming. I think all of those are really important points. Okay, same question over to you, Leah. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I'm good.
Okay, good.
I'm good. So within ORR, there's wide recognition of the importance of incorporating the perspectives and feedback of children who have been in ORR care and their families into our policies, procedures, and best practices. So I wanted to mention a few quick things. First, every ORR care provider facility is required to have a space where children can provide feedback. This can be anonymous feedback, or they attach their name to it, and as well as ask questions, make recommendations. This is something that ORR and its network of care provider facilities take very seriously and has led to policy and process changes in the past. And then the next two things I wanted to mention are things that we're building right now, so in the building phase. So ORR is hiring staff to build out a structure to ensure that we have a sustainable way to incorporate youth voice and incorporate that into ORR's work and service delivery, so sort of moving from an ad hoc model that exists at present and towards a team, a dedicated team that will ensure that this perspective is regularly and consistently incorporated. And then last but certainly not least, ORR is currently laying the foundation to incorporate youth voice more directly into all aspects of our work, so that former unaccompanied children and their sponsors will have an opportunity to help shape ORR's policies and practices, as well as to help us to educate the public on the unique experiences and needs of the children and youth that ORR serves, or who ORR serves. And that's in progress, more to come soon, but I wanted to share that important ongoing work.
Thank you, that's fantastic. I think just based on hearing some of the input from this morning's panel, I think we've got lots of previously unaccompanied and separated children who would love to feed in and have a lot of really fantastic insights from their own experiences on ways things could have been different or better for them. So thank you. I love breaking news, so wonderful to hear. Okay, over to you, Kelly. Same question.
Yeah, so I hinted a little bit at this, that this is still an area for growth for us, but I think what we're really trying to do is figure out how best to ensure that child participation isn't just representational, but also a meaningful engagement, and finding the right way to do that. I think we've made a lot better push to make sure that children and young people are in the room, but how to make sure that that presence leads to actual meaningful work in terms of our programming and our policy is something that we're really trying to grapple with now. And so one way that we have tried to do this is through our partnership actually with UNHCR and some other partners through the Global Youth Advisory Council and the previous iterations of this work. And what this group is an advisory council of refugee young people to come together and solve problems in their communities and engage with the humanitarian community as well. The work that we've invested in resulted in 7 core actions for refugee youth, which serve as the framework for humanitarian actors to structure their work with and for youth. This advisory council provides opportunities for young people to share their perspectives and their experiences, become agents of change in their communities, and ensure that their communities have input in the work that humanitarian partners are doing at all different levels. We're really pleased to be able to support many of their participation in the upcoming Global Refugee Forum, and as I spoke about trying to make sure that that engagement is meaningful, their participation will hit at a variety of different ways and different levels in the policy, sharing their stories, engaging at the highest levels of our government, but also advocating for their engagement with other governments as well as we get into the Global Refugee Forum.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the focus on meaningful. I will say, just as an aside from Save the Children's perspective, it sometimes is really hard to make sure that that's happening for children, particularly when they're still in school. They're not around just to join meetings and conversations every day, and so I think it is really we have to adapt our systems to accommodate their voices and their schedules and their needs, and it is difficult to do that for anyone, even Save the Children, but never mind sort of, UN agencies and the US government. So thank you, I really appreciate that. And the plug for the Global Youth Advisory Council, that's wonderful. I'm glad to know that. I haven't spoken with them in ages, but great to know that they're still around and feeding into some decisions. Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm just going to ask each of you sort of one more quick question that I'd love to have an answer to, but I recognize that not all of you may be able to answer, so if you can't, no pressure. But we would love to hear if you can name sort of one concrete thing that US policy and practice can change, can transform for the better, to better meet the needs of children on the move. I think you've given some examples of where your different roles are headed, what you're doing already. Well, if you can name one concrete thing that we should try to fix going forward, I'd love to hear it. Who wants to go first? I know, I'm sorry. This is a friendly room.
Sure. Yeah, key moment there. I mean, it's all comes down to accountability. I think what Jan was saying earlier is really holding ourselves accountable. I often, as the child protection advocate in the room, am often up against policymakers, et cetera, trying to explain why children matter and why child protection isn't this niche technical area, but it really should be central to everything that we're doing. And I like to remind everybody that they are almost half the population that we say we serve. And so are they half of our consideration when we're doing policy? Are they half our consideration when we're allocating funding? Are they half our consideration when we're engaging with different stakeholders? And I think just holding ourselves more accountable to that is something we need to all collectively work on.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, no, and I think in the same vein, from our perspective, I've cheated a bit because you said one thing, so I'll make it very broad. And I'll
You can name two, maybe not like a whole list, though.
But it comes back to something I mentioned earlier, that I don't think we can separate the child protection response to children on the move from the broader policy framework that affects people on the move. And I think in that, for us, talking about what would a fairer, more effective asylum system look at the US border, talking about how would expanded resettlement, expanded legal pathways, how can we pursue that operationally? In those discussions, which are very real now and will, I think, be real moving forward, I think it's essential that the issue of children and families in those settings is given sufficient focus, sufficient priority. So when we're talking about hopefully one day fundamental reform of the U.S. asylum framework, that from the outset in developing that the responses to children, the rights of children is not something added at the end to tick a box, but something that it's built around. And I think similarly, as we are in that space now in the region, talking a lot about how the very welcome initiatives U.S. is taking to strengthen access to the U.S. from further afield, that we also look at that with a very much children and a family lens. And I think we are taking steps on this, but I think if I could wish for one thing moving forward is that we maintain that focus and make sure that it leads to results, and we all have a role to play in that. So it is, yes, it's an ask to the US government, but we also recognize that from the UN we have a role to play, and we have accountability again to make that a reality.
Fantastic, thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, I want to leave some time for questions. And remember, I've told them all that you're a friendly audience. So let's keep this a friendly audience. But is there anyone out there who's got a question for one or all of our panelists? Yes, I see somebody over here.
Stand. Okay. Thank you to all the panelists. Christina with Islamic Relief. So I had a question, given that most of the first responders, caregivers, and advocates are people in communities of faith at all levels, at the very local level, at the national level, and then at the international level, like Islamic Relief as well. I'm just wondering how there could be better collaboration and more recognition of the work that faith actors and faith communities are doing to respond to this crisis, and what you might say to that and how. Thank you.
Wonderful. Does anyone want to jump in there? Any reflections?
I just want to acknowledge first and foremost the role that faith-based organizations are playing around the world in this, and how certainly in thinking back in my own role, I've been part of a number of initiatives, regional or global, on interfaith dialogue around response, around leveraging those capacities, where there have been attempts then to recognize that and to facilitate that cooperation. I don't have, a sort of a clear recommendation of where we take that. Others have mentioned the Global Refugee Forum as an inclusive global mechanism that is meant to rally support for all responses, and I think faith-based organization can have a big role to play at that global level as well, will have and are having a big role to play. So I can only say from the UNHCR perspective that the role is recognized, the importance of it is recognized, and it is one of many priorities in terms of how do you bring all stakeholders' capacities to bear in improving the response for refugees around the world, and so also, of course, on the children issue. It's a general perspective, but...
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Leah. So I would just echo that. I think, you know, at ORR, a lot of the, not all, but some of our grantees for facilities that care for children, also some of the providers, many of the providers actually for services such as post-release services, home studies, those are faith-based organizations, and so we've partnered with faith-based organizations for a very, very long time in those capacities. We're grateful of that collaboration. The other thing I would say is we do have regular stakeholder meetings, and so you're happy also to connect with you after this, if that's helpful. I know I didn't work as closely on this particular issue, but I know, for instance, another way that we have collaborated is with when Afghan children were coming frequently into care. I lost track almost 2 years ago. I know that community organizations, including religious organizations, were extremely helpful in partnership in providing support, community resources, particularly for that population. But again, it's not a new collaboration to any extent with faith-based institutions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great question. Yes, I see a hand right there. I'm like pointing at people with my pen. I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I wanted to ask, in the past few years, detention of children has really been a big topic in the news and just otherwise. So I was thinking more for Leah in terms of ORR, but just in general, what measures are being taken that you've seen or do you want to see being taken to reduce detention of children, especially in cases where, I know in ORR, a lot of kids with disabilities or a criminal history or other factors get stepped up to secure placements, and that's not always seen as the traditional, as extreme as, say, children in cages, but it's still something really pervasive. So I was just wondering what you've seen in the field.
Thank you. Yeah, children being detained for any reason is always bad, never in their best interests. But maybe, Leah, do you want to speak from your, and I'd
Sure,
love
and then
if someone wants to speak from the global perspective as well.
Absolutely. So thanks for that question. We are, really trying to move. It's not going to maybe answer all the, but I'll do what I can. We're trying to really move towards a community-based care model. So really trying to move away from congregate care settings and so forth. But obviously, we can do as much as we get funding to do so. And then also something that I would highlight is just when we do have grants out there on the street, so to speak, having really good providers step up and be willing to be providers whom we can work with. ORR itself doesn't operate our facilities. We really rely on community-based partners and organizations to apply for those grants and to operate those facilities to care for the children in our custody, frankly. So it's not maybe the full answer, but hopefully that's helpful, and I'd welcome any other thoughts my panel will be.
Yeah, this is definitely a key political and policy issue for us. And I work on alternatives to detention, immigration detention particularly, around the world. And of course, for children, that's a unique and special case. But it is something that we are engaging with significantly more, I would even say, in the last few years, of really trying to push our partners to follow the best interest procedures in place to support children, alternatives for children in particular. And that includes both children who are unaccompanied, but also children with their families, right? And making sure that we're ending family-based detention as well in the same way, because I think we often, very rightly so, focus a lot on the unaccompanied and separated kids, and I think for us, a huge component is really trying to advance our diplomacy around family reunification and finding complementary pathways for children to be able to reunify with family members when in their best interest, but also really remembering that family-based immigration detention is just as detrimental to children as well, and so really trying to tackle both of those issues simultaneously.
Thank you. Did you want anything?
I can just echo, of course, that the global, it's a global priority for UNHCR and has been, I must say, a bit of a battle in the last 15, 20 years to fight against what has become increasingly an enforcement-based sort of knee-jerk reaction around the world to populations on the move, and where detention has been very central in the toolbox of so many states around the world, and which has, you know, necessitated a lot of local, regional, and global efforts around detention, and we could have a whole meeting just on that. But just to maybe echo that, from UNHCR, we would agree with your first comment, Leslie, that detention is never in the best interest of a child. So that means we need to work with states to find what are better alternatives than the detention options. And as I said at the opening, we are pleased to see how the US has made a lot of progress on this, has found other ways to receive children, including in families, without using detention. But it's not a battle, as I call it, it's not a battle that we have won yet around the world, and it's one that will continue to be very much on our advocacy priority list. I think for us it's important to not just be a watchdog around the world to say, you're doing it wrong, you can't do this because you're breaching rights. We have to add to that, here is a better way to organize your reception. And for that reason, we do a lot also to try and collect good practices. I'm not saying best practices because often they're hard to find, but at least good practices that can show other ways than using detention as a primary response to children on the move.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I do a lot of advocacy on children in detention and really appreciated that, so thank you. Yes, I see a hand right here, please. Someone will come to you with a microphone, yes.
Well, thank you for being here, and I was one of the people in the lived experience, and I wanted to, I really want to understand what some of the challenges U.S. policymakers face in engaging children in meaningful ways, as you mentioned. So this question is more for Kelly and Leah. Can you explain a little bit, just maybe elaborate a little bit and, you know, give some specifics on what exactly are the challenges that you face in engaging those children? Is it financial? Is it technical? And I know, Leslie, you mentioned the fact that children are in school during the day, that makes it hard, but for me, I can already see how that can easily be fixed. So I want to understand, what is it a willpower, maybe people are just not really willing, or is it financial, is it technical, and just, you know, speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's all of those. There's a lot of factors at play. I think there's a couple of pieces that I'll unpack. One is just the logistics of having young people from many of the places that we work be able to meaningfully participate, because many countries have prohibitive visa restrictions and things like that. So just even the logistics of having individuals, particularly children, so the logistics of making sure their caregivers and the child can all be able to come and play a role in kind of global forums is logistically more challenging than I think even I could have appreciated until trying to look at that aspect from, you know, as we lead up to the Global Refugee Forum and things like that. That aside, I think it is a political will issue as well, right? We need to make sure that at every level of policy making, they value that input. And, you know, I can say, maybe a little off the record, but even just today, I got a little pushback from some senior folks of saying, like, we want children to be able to be seen as they know best. And they're like, well, are children are they running the program? I was like, no. And so I think just like shifting the mindset to understand that, like, we're doing so much work on accountability to affected populations and trying to bring in, you know, individuals' lived experiences into this. But that includes children, and I think that when people think of children, they think of very young children and don't understand that we're talking about all young people. And young children have a role to play too, right? And that it's all through the ages and stages of what they're looking at and trying to be able to get that political will to engage and then actually do that. from where I sit in DC, and I work on big global policy, and have lots and lots of funding that we give to big partners like UNHCR. So we're a little bit removed from the day-to-day kind of engagement, and so that's why I really honed in on trying to make sure that our implementing partners are getting that feedback when designing programs. So by the time that proposal comes across my desk and we look at it, I can see very clearly that they've consulted with young people. And so for us, I think that is a way that we're trying to tackle this issue. But I do think that it's still about socializing that this is important and making sure that everyone really values that. I think when we do engage, we see the benefits. And so just showing how that can play a role in making our programming better and more effective is important.
So what I would add is within my agency, there's a lot of, tremendous interest, and everyone, I think, recognizes the value of getting children and youth voice and perspective, feedback, how informative and helpful that can be, how, transformative. And I think, so I'm still relatively new to government, I think. I know it's almost 2 years, but you would not believe the learning curve. And what I would also say is we're in a building phase very much in my agency right now, and trying to find a way to regularize that input, have consistency. And so I think what I've learned, and it may not be a satisfactory answer, but what I've learned is that when you don't have an existing mechanism to do it, I couldn't even tell you all the steps, but basically it takes a while to establish, but we're very much in the building phase because we recognize its importance. So.
Thank you. Yeah, so all of the above was the answer. We've got logistical, technical, socializing, political will, yeah. And what you didn't say, but what I gathered from Leah, was just general bureaucracy. It takes forever to do anything, seems to be the answer.
Yes.
Yeah, did you
and
want
I
to?
can also just echo it from our side. I think a few things were said that resonate with me. One is it's a way of working issue as well. It's sort of the practical reality of humanitarian response on the ground is, of course, extremely multifaceted, extremely pressured often. So one thing is to put something in a strategy and have it as a target, as something you want to achieve. Another challenge, which is harder, is to integrate something in a way of working and even in a way of thinking of how a delivery should happen. And it's a bit of a glass half full situation. Looking back at the years I've been involved, I think a lot of progress has been made. I think the situation is much better on this than it used to be. It is not there yet, and I think there are ways that we're trying within the UN system and UNHCR to address it. Practical things like, how do you report on a project? What do you need to report on? What needs to be in an agreement with a partner on a specific response? The fact that now these elements are mandatory reporting, so it's a way of making sure that whether or not you're used to working on it, it finds its way into the daily work of every colleague on the ground. And I think it's the only way to take it forward, even though it doesn't always give immediate results on every aspect of it. But yeah.
Great. Okay, so unfortunately we're running low on time, and want to make sure that we leave the stage so our next panel can start on time, and we can't wait to hear from them as well. So I just wanted to close out by saying thank you so much again to all of you for being here. Thank you to all of you for listening and for asking such really great, insightful questions. I think it's very clear that there is still a lot of work to do, but we have some strong champions from within the system that those of us outside the system can partner with and help along the way, because we really do. We want to work collaboratively. We want to work together. We are a community, all really just trying to do what we can to make sure that children on the move, their needs, their priorities, their rights are all front and center of policy and practice. So thank you very much, and really thank you. We can't do any of this without your input and your guidance, so thank you for that. And I will end there. Yes?
Thank you.
I feel like I need a "the end" sign. Thank you.
Thank you so much.